So it's week 12, and what we want to talk about today are APIs. How many of you have heard, who's heard of the term API before? Some of you? Okay. So, well, what does API stand for, first of all? What does that term actually mean? The official name and what it actually means kind of are two separate things. Anybody know what it stands for? Yeah, it's an application programming interface, which doesn't mean very much. If you go home tonight and you're having dinner with your family or your spouse or your roommates and they say, oh, what'd you do today? Oh, we talked about APIs in Rich's class. Well, what's that? It's an application programming interface. That really doesn't mean anything, right, to the average person. How would you describe what an API is in plain everyday language to a non-technical person? Lisa, what do you think? Okay, ready to use code created by someone else. Any other thoughts, Ted?
Have two applications communicate.
Yeah, that would be sort of in very lay person's terms, it's two separate applications being able to communicate some way or somehow. Okay, so and a huge amount of web development is either creating our own APIs or consuming using APIs that were created by other web developers and other systems. Does anybody, what would some examples of commonly used APIs be, or APIs you've heard of? Chad?
Google API.
Okay, and right here, right? Here we're using this website. They wanted to have, it's a realtor, they wanted to be able to show someone who's looking for properties where all the schools were in Barrie. We didn't have to draw that map. Google makes a map API available to us, right? Where we tell Google what kind of map we want and it generates it and we can embed it in our application. So that would be one really common example. What are some other common APIs that you've seen? Maps is not the only one. Google makes a bunch of really popular APIs that we see all over the place. What other functionality does Google build? Yeah, Google Ads. We want to display ads on our site. Rather than writing our own code, we can use Google's Ad API. What else does Google make available to us? Google Analytics, yep. Google Fonts, yep. Yep, there is an API for mail. What about here? Let's see. So when we get the results, how can we tell, even by looking, that the Georgian website uses Google Search API? You can tell just by looking at it. How can you tell? Yeah, because it looks exactly like the search results page on Google's own website. And if we go down, of course, we can see it's using the Google Search API. So rather than writing our own search, we can just use the Google API. Google also makes available, surprised no one's mentioned this one, right? Embedded video. Google owns YouTube, so if we want video, we're not going to build our own video player to display them. We're just going to upload the videos to YouTube and use the YouTube code to embed. Okay? So Google is one of the biggest players in terms of the API space. But a lot of other big internet companies and web companies have APIs as well. What are some other APIs that we see all over the place besides the ones we've looked at from Google, who are some of Google's competition? Yeah, what kind of APIs does Facebook make available? What functionality can we build into our own site that comes from Facebook, Brad? Yep, shares, feeds, comments. Right? Rather than making our own comment code, as long as you have a Facebook account, we'll use the Facebook comment thread. Yes, any site that lets you have social sign-on, right? All of those companies have made an API that allows you to authenticate yourself through your account on their site, right? So we can sign on with GitHub, we can sign on with Facebook, we can sign in places with Google or Twitter or other social media. So all of these are common APIs, right? So we're used to seeing them all the time on many of the sites that we visit. So the idea is, rather than the developer having to write that code, they're using the API. That code was developed by another company. So it saves us time. We don't have to write the code ourselves. We can use someone else's code. Okay? So when we're starting out, typically what we do is use these kinds of APIs so we can add functionality to our site really quickly and easily, right? Think how long it would take to build this yourself. Right? It would take forever. Whereas we can get this from Google in about 2 minutes, and it stays up to date, right? As soon as Google updates their API, our map is going to get updated. So it makes sense for us to use APIs and to reuse someone else's code when we can, rather than building everything by ourselves. Okay? So one of the first things that we start to think about whenever someone says, hey, on my website, I need something that does X. Before you sit down and start figuring out how you're going to do X, the first thing we should ask ourselves is, well, has somebody else already written X as an API that we can just use and save our client money and save time in terms of getting this up and running? And the answer is not always. There isn't always an API for everything, and there are limits, but much of the functionality that we build from site to site is reusable. And there's lots of APIs out there that will already do a lot of the things we need. Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to work on adding 3 different APIs into our little beer store application. Okay. We're going to add a little weather API. So in our footer, we can display the current weather in Barrie, which is miserable right now. So we'll use just simple JavaScript API for that. Then we're going to add another API from Google, which will help prevent on our register page, help ensure that it's actually a human and not a spam bot filling out our forms. What API will we use for that? We've all seen it. Dempsey? Yeah, we'll use reCAPTCHA, which is also, wasn't originally a Google product, but now it is. Google bought it several years ago. So we're going to have to read through the documentation on Google, on the reCAPTCHA site, figure out how to implement it into our application, and we'll get that working. And then for your lab, we're going to do, Robert, what you said, you mentioned Facebook comments. We're going to add onto our beers page a Facebook comment thread. So you can make comments on that page, and anybody who has a Facebook page and can log into our site can add to that comment thread. That'll be your lab. It'll be the world's fastest lab. It should take you 5 minutes to do the lab. So that's where we're going today. Just a bit more. I'm going to show just a quick, this is about a 5-minute video here. So, you know, Ted, you described really well what an API is. It really just lets 2 different applications talk to each other in some way, right? Either it's exchanging data or we're incorporating in functionality from an API into a different application, okay? This is a very old name. I'm just going to show you a 5-minute video about kind of where APIs came from and their background, because it'll help give a little more context as to what APIs have become today and how we're using them. Oops, sorry.
Talk about application programming interfaces, or APIs. I wanted to clear up a lot of the confusion. There's lots of information on the web out there, but I feel like a lot of the times it's abstract, it's difficult to digest, and sometimes it's just plain wrong. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what an API is and kind of what it started out to mean originally and what it has evolved to. Because I think that is a big part of how the confusion has come about. So what an API is really just the way in which a program can be communicated with or worked with by another program. I'll say that again. A way in which a program can be communicated with or worked with aka interface with, by another program. So that is kind of the general idea of what an API is today, and that's going to be how people are using it, usually when they're using it in various contexts. So looking at how an application programming interface, or API, kind of got its name and evolved into what it is today, we need to look at what is the Windows operating system, Windows OS. So not too long ago, the Windows OS came out. And this was kind of before the web had become what it is today. So we had most programmers were either working on the Windows operating system, which is known as system programming, or they were working on developing kind of various applications, which might look like a calculator or a game, like Minesweeper, or something like Microsoft Word. But these are all kind of higher level applications that are being developed. And the way that these applications were developed was by tapping into what Windows offered as the Windows API. And what the Windows API is just a set of little programs that can be used by applications. And what I mean by that, by little programs, there's just lots of, just that really. So a Windows OS might offer a little program that can say save. So what the save program does is save a file. So now when you need to save a file in Microsoft Word just calls this little save program. And so that's part of their API. Another little program might be delete. So we can now delete a file. But so they have these little programs that essentially other application programs can use, and this kind of interface or documentation is known as the API. What it really is a manual for programmers to work on top of the Windows operating system. So it has documented all of that information. So that is kind of where the term API, or application programming interface, comes from. Now, moving forward to today, most of what we have, or a lot of what we have, are developers who are developing kind of on the web, or building websites like Facebook or Twitter, Spotify, these kind of big web applications, or websites. But we've kind of kept this name, API, even though we're not working in the specific context of application and system programming. We're really working in the context of everything, building websites, building applications, building iPhone apps, working with databases, whatever we're doing, we still kind of refer to the documentation around the little programs that another program can access as an API. So to give you an example, Facebook, the big evil Facebook by Mark Zuckerberg, has lots of little programs that make up the larger program Facebook. A little program might look like a Coke program, or a like program, or a post program, an upload program. So we have all these little programs that Facebook has that makes up Facebook. So what they decide to do is, well, why not open up our little programs to the world so that other people can integrate their websites and their software into our software, and we can kind of expand our business that way. So that's exactly what they do. So they go and document all this information, and they say, all right, other people, here's other people. We'll now let you use our system and poke a person, or use your system to like a person, or post on somebody's wall. So basically what they're doing is they're opening up their little programs. And generally what they do is they kind of control how people are able to access their little programs in a pretty specific manner. So they'll say, you can poke people 300 times a day or something. So they very much control how people are working with their software. But that is really what I think people refer to today as APIs, for the most part. They're generally talking about specific specifically web APIs or also web services. So really all that is just these little programs and the manner in which they can be accessed by an outside program. That makes up our API or web service. So it's really as simple as that.
I'm going to grab my lesson 11 folder, copy it into a lesson 12 folder, and get a current version of my application up and running. So if you want to grab your stuff from last week, and then I'm just going to open this up in my code editor. And I'll just load it up in my browser, make sure it runs. So the first thing we want to do is we want to consume a very simple weather API and just include it down in our footer. Now, normally, the Weather Network website, they have a little weather widget that we can use. For some reason right now, it's not, their website isn't working. It says we can generate a widget and it will show us all the code we need to include on our site. And it seems to be offline. It doesn't seem to work. You go through the whole process, you click finish, show me my widget, and nothing happens. So I found an alternative. So in your lesson 12 folder, there's a link here that says weather widgets. Click on that and open it up. So this site offers some very simple APIs, just JavaScript based. Now these widgets are much too big here at the top. I don't want one of these because I want to put it down in my footer over here. And these widgets are going to be much too tall, but they have some smaller ones. So if I scroll down to the bottom, I want to use this one here. It's only 36 pixels high, so it's going to fit in. So all we need to do, typically whenever we're going to use someone else's API, is really a three-step process. Find the API that we think will work, that has the functionality we want. Read the instructions. You do have to read the instructions and documentation, how to use the API. This is a really simple example. And then you have to go ahead and implement it. So here they have this nice instruction that says, get code. I think I can follow that. So I'm going to click on, or you could customize it first if you want. I'll just click on get code. I'm fine to display it this way. And read the instructions. Number 1. Highlight following code. Number 2, copy and paste this code into your website where you want the weather widget to appear. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to open up my footer.php. I did the very last one. This one here. You can try one of the other ones though, doesn't matter. So then in my footer, just after we have the footer text, I'm just going to paste in that code. We may need to format it a bit, but we'll see how it works. So where my cursor's flashing, I'll just paste it all in. And yes, it just puts it all in one line, which doesn't really matter. So we can see it creates a couple of div tags. It has the colors built right in here, which you can modify. Here's the link. This is where it goes to their website with Barry. And it uses JavaScript to get the current weather every time our page loads. So all I'm going to do is save that and go refresh any page on my site. There's our weather. Now, I don't really like where it's appearing. I'm going to move it a little bit. I want to move it kind of off to the right. So I'll wrap this original content in a div tag and use a bootstrap class. So around this, above my copyright statement, I'm going to put a div class equals call, maybe 8. Actually, we'll make it 10 columns. And I'll close my div down below. So I'm just adding those tags around the statement we already had in there. We'll see if that improves how it looks. Yeah, that works. That should push the weather off to the right. Good. Centers it vertically. Looks better. So now this will appear on every page, right? Because it's embedded in our footer. World's simplest API call. Copy, paste. When you do your lab 4 to do the Facebook comment API, it's about that easy. Find the API, click get code, copy and paste it in to your page. And we have a Facebook comment thread on any page. I might just wrap a bit of the code. So if we want to display the current weather on a page, that's all we have to do, right? We're not going to write our own code to find the weather. We're just going to use a simple API to do it. Now, the one thing we have to keep in mind is this API is only going to work so long as this website and their API is online and it's working. Right? If this site goes out of business or they change the address or change the API, then suddenly our weather widget might break. So this is one of the challenges and one of the limits. When we rely on an API for functionality, we need that API to be online and not to get changed. And the APIs, they will change over time. And you'll see that when we look at the reCAPTCHA API, because we're now on version 2. And we'll see that version 1 and version 2 of reCAPTCHA, and if you think about it as an end user, you've probably seen both of them, they're quite different. So when we use APIs, we have to be responsible to monitor them regularly and check them for changes or updates. Because it might, if they change or update, it might break the functionality in our site. Anybody having any questions or issues getting your weather to display? Jacob?
Well, not that factory code and getting there. Setting on line 27 in the header. Session start.
What's the error?
Session start cannot send session cache limiter. Header set. Header's already set.
I was getting that error when I was working on my assignment. If the PHP tag has white space in front of it, it crashes for me.
Yeah, there can't be any white space at the top, and you may need to have, so there should be no white space here. So there's our world's simplest API call. Doesn't get much easier than that. Find a JavaScript API, copy the code, paste it in, save, done. So what we'll do, we're going to take a pause here. When we come back, we're going to look at adding the reCAPTCHA API onto our user registration page, which will help keep spammers out, or at least reduce them. Okay, so we'll use the Google API. It's going to be quite a bit more involved than our first really simple example. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break here.